Today I'm going to be working on a forging square that's specifically designed for blacksmiths working around hot metal. On a traditional forging square, the handle is usually just an extension of one of the legs of the square, and it's only used for checking an outside corner for squareness. I've designed this one so the square can be rotated in any position inside the handle, so that allows you to use it to check an inside corner as well as an outside corner. The handle can also be locked in any position, which makes the square a lot less awkward to use. The square itself is just cut out from an 8" by 8" piece of 14 gauge sheet metal. Here I'm using an old carpenter square that I know is true, and I'm setting it up so that the inside edge is parallel to the outside edge of the sheet metal. I've already used the square to make sure that the outside edge of the sheet metal is perfectly at 90 degrees. For this application, there's no real reason to have the inside edge of the square align perfectly with the outside edge of the square. But on the other hand, there's no real reason to not have it align either. So I just feel it's better to take the time to make sure that it's perfectly aligned, and that way you don't have to worry about it. Later on, if you ever wanted to use that to make two parallel lines, you have that option. Now I'm going to be heading over to the bandsaw to cut this out, and I'm going to be making sure that I stay well outside of the layout lines. Here I have the carpenter square set up in the vise along with the square that I'm making. I have the carpenter square laid exactly on the layout lines that I'm working to, and I'm ready to start filing down to those lines. I'm using the carpenter square as a filing guide to make sure that I have a perfectly straight line that's 90 degrees with the other face. My aim is to file up to the carpenter square, but not actually down to the carpenter square. I'm going to be leaving a very, very thin hairline of metal above the carpenter square. Even though this is a tempered steel carpenter square and the file is not likely going to be damaging it if I do decide to file right down to it, I just don't want to take a chance of the file ruining a perfectly good square. Also, there's no reason to try to build in that level of accuracy with this tool. All you need to do is to bring the line down to the square so that it's visually straight and that both sides are 90 degrees to each other. The purpose of the square is to just give you some kind of a visual reference while you're forging something to let you know whether you're at 90 degrees or not. So if the line varies by a few thou here and there, you really don't need to stress out about that. It doesn't have to have that machined precision. When I'm ready to do the other side of the square, I use a sheet metal clamp to lock everything in position while I rotate it around in the vise. After I have it locked in position, I take the clamp off and make sure that nothing has moved. When I'm satisfied that everything's still straight, I just file the other edge the same way. And then when I'm done with that face, I'll take it out of the vise and check it with the square to make sure that everything lines up. The handle I'm making is similar to what you would find on a wheelwright's Traveler. It has two legs that wrap around either side, and the upper end of the legs get forge welded together into a handle. I'm starting off with a 20" length of 3/8 round. I'm going to be forging one leg on each end of this bar, and then I'm going to cut it in the middle and fold it over on itself. Here I'm forging out the part of the leg that's going to wrap around both sides, and I've left a small offset at the end to form a pad for the pivot pin. And you're going to see me constantly referring to these calipers, and that's just to make sure that both ends of the forging wind up identical. I'm going to be using these calipers to determine the position of the second offset while I'm forging the leg back. The caliper setting is determined by putting one leg of the caliper in the center punch mark for the drill hole of the square, and then spinning the calipers around the square and making sure that the other leg clears all the points. This forging doesn't need to be that precise, but you do have to make sure that both halves of the forging match each other before you cut it in the middle. Otherwise, things aren't going to line up. So I'm just making one final check before I cut this bar in half. I have the calipers set so that they start at the center of the pad and go to the offset. As long as I have that on the other side, we're okay. Here I'm just getting the bar ready for welding. I'm just hammering the ends to try to get the offsets to line up. Here I'm taking a few welding heats to forge the handle into a solid bar. I'm just hammering the handle into a simple round bar, and I'm flattening the end slightly. I'm going to be punching that later and forging it into a ring. Once the handle is roughed in, I'll turn it around and start straightening out the legs. And then it's just a matter of systematically going over everything, making sure that everything's smooth and lines up. The last piece that needs to be forged out is the wing nut that's going to tighten up onto the carriage bolt and lock the square in place. This is your typical one-sided forged wing nut. It just has a rat tail on one side, and the hole is drilled and threaded to fit the 1/4 inch carriage bolt that I'm using as the locking mechanism. And here's another look at the square fully assembled. I've cleaned up everything with a file and a disc sander, and then I threw it back in the fire to put the forging scale back on, and then I dipped it in oil to give it a protective coating.